Hello, everyone. Today is April 30th. We are doing a PL on the Go series, Resilience Series Part 2 for PNW BOCES. I just see that we have a couple more participants joining us, so bear with me as I click away here. So first, I just wanted to start off by welcoming you and telling you a little bit about the Guidance and Child Study Center at PNW BOCES. We exist to ensure pathways to success for every student, and with that, we do that by helping to improve school and community outcomes via the dissemination of professional development, addressing the students who are most marginalized in our communities, that being students of color, English language learners, LGBTQI2S students, and so forth. And how we do that, one of the ways that we do that in terms of supporting children and families is by supporting the adults that are in their lives, specifically through professional development opportunities like this one, using evidence-based practices. These are just some of the services that we are also develop and do throughout the school year. Now, of course, a lot of this is now being done in a digital platform, and we have to pivot during these times of crisis. This is the Guidance and Child Studies Center with our mission statement. It is headed by Dr. Andrew Eckerd. Dr. Dixelia López, bilingual school psychologist and evaluation specialist for the Guidance and Child Studies Center. And joining us today is Louis Dutra, Secretary to School Administrator, who is helping me monitor the questions in the chat box. We are recording this session. I'm wondering if yes, I did hit record. And we will continue and stopping periodically for questions as we go along. So this is a part 2 of the series on the road to resilience. Here's my contact information. Aside from being a bilingual school psychologist, I'm also an international school psychologist, and I'll be talking a little bit later about what that means in relationship to the program for today. Last time we spoke about individual resilience frameworks, and today we'll talk about that, specifically focusing on children, families, and communities, both from the resilience framework of the individual as well as the interconnective framework of the bidirectional interaction of individuals to communities and the systems that surround their functioning. So as bilingual school psychologist, I've been practicing for the past 15 years or so, but I am also have international psychology, and I basically believe that resilience, or any framework that we're thinking about, should be contextually and culturally inclusive and informed. And so as a school psychologist, I focus more on the individual factors, but as an international psychologist, we're more focused on individual and group dynamics that affect things or events that happen globally. And with that said, we know that there is a difference between the definition of resilience in the Western world versus those in a more collectivistic culture, where the Western resilient frameworks only focuses on the individual, whereas in other collectivistic cultures, we're talking about the bidirectional interaction of between the individual and the socio-ecological framework that they are in. One of the things that we want to remind ourselves is that we are indeed functioning within the realms of an epidemic. And what that means is that we are all in the situation of emergency. And some of us may feel this emergency more vivid and more relevant. Some of us may be coping in different ways, but ultimately children are particularly vulnerable to the negative long-term outcomes of such emergencies, and particularly because such global emergencies have disrupted the primary social support systems of children, including the family, school, and community at large. And when we're talking about differential exposure, we're talking about the extent by which the person or individuals or communities are impacted. And those that are most vulnerable, of course, are the students or the individuals or families that are of low socioeconomic backgrounds and have other risk factors such as health, and may also have economic struggles right now. So we know that some of our families, for example, may be struggling more than others. And so they're going to be, those children within those frameworks are going to be more highly vulnerable to the traumatic aftermaths of an emergencies. We know, for example, that domestic violence at this point in time is on the rise. We know that those students, in terms of the adverse childhood experiences, 1 out of 4 students have been exposed to many traumatic experiences. Couple that with the epidemic that we're in and other familial stressors, all of that compounds the experience of children and families in particular. So how do we define resilience? Basically, it's an essential characteristic that helps combat adversity through the development of healthy perspectives, and it enables the emergence from adversity with a positive sense of self. So that's more of like an individualistic definition of resilience. But as we know, no individual lives or is raised in a vacuum. And so we really want to focus on the individual, but also on the co-directional interaction between self and others and the environment at large. Again, some of the assumptions, and I know we went over these last time, just for those of you who are joining us for the first time today, we presume some degree of stress or adversity when we're talking about resilience. And of course, the pandemic is a huge amount of stress for different reasons for each of us as individuals and also for our families. There's also the assumption that resilience is common, which means that anyone can have resilience. And resilience is also easier for some more than others. So people who obviously have significant mental illness, depression, or anxiety, those people are going to have more of a difficult time exhibiting resilience or coping strategies that are effective. And lastly, of course, in order to thrive, you must first survive, right? So families' basic needs must first be met. I know for myself, there are days specifically where I feel like I'm just going through the motions, right? I'm just surviving as opposed to thriving, but that doesn't mean that I can't help my children or others thrive, even though I might feel myself that I'm currently just going through the motions or surviving. Again, focusing on children, this comes from the American Academy of Pediatrics. And the first 3 bullets here we talked about last time in terms of the resilience in children. How do we foster that? So we believe in them unconditionally. More than ever, our children right now require and request our attention and our ability to be there for them, to love them unconditionally. And that's more than ever, that is one of the most important things right now. Our children also model our behaviors. And so one of the things that we emphasized last time was that in order for us to make sure that our students or our kids are resilient, especially within own family networks, we need to model the behavior that we want to see in them. And the last here what I'm talking about is the nurturing the 7 C's, and I'm going to go through that in a moment, let you know what those are. Give me a second, I'm just admitting some people here. Making sure I have what I need up. Okay. So these are the 7 C's. The first 4 were developed in a group, and then there was more added by Dr. Kenneth, who is part of the American Academy of Pediatrics. So we're going to start with competence. Give me a second here while I pull up my notes, which were nicely visible before. Okay. So the pediatrician Kenneth Kingsbury specializes in building resilience in kids, and he believes that if we want our children to experience the world as fully as possible with some of its pain and all of its joy, they need resilience. And so the 7 C's model is a practical approach for parents and communities to prepare children to thrive. So again, even though I might not feel that I'm thriving myself, we do have these competencies that we can nurture in the children that are in our lives. So the first one is competence, and basically the ability to handle situations effectively. This is not a vague statement or feeling of I can do this, but basically it is allowing students or children to develop the skills that allow them to trust their judgment and make responsible choices for themselves. The way we go about this as parents or as educators is to let children make safe mistakes so that they have the opportunity to make right for themselves, and avoid trying to protect them from every stumble, right? And I think as particularly as a parent, that is quite difficult at times to do. You want to encourage children to focus on building their own strengths when they handle a situation capably, acknowledge what they have done well and how that will affect others and themselves. So that's number 1 in competence. Confidence obviously develops from one's belief in our own ability, so that if you are allowed to have a lot of competence, confidence will follow. So that children gain confidence as they demonstrate their competence in real situations. So instead of focusing only on achievements, for example, we need to encourage the development of personal qualities like fairness, integrity, persistence, and kindness. And we need to do this by praising children honestly and specifically. So rather than you saying you're a great artist, say, I love the colors you use in that painting. Or rather than saying you did a good job picking up those toys, you are being a responsible student or child by picking up those toys and following my direction. So you want to be very specific in terms of the wording for children so that they can increase their confidence and so also their competence in whatever it is they're doing. In our first session, we talked a lot about connections, and this is that much more important in the COVID-19 era that we're in, because connections, we know that children strive on connection. And I know that some of us who are educators as well as parents are trying to juggle, this may be quite difficult and challenging at times because the lines of boundaries that were there between work and home are no longer evident. But connections are very important, and we need to make sure that our children feel our unconditional love. We need to make sure that they empathize with both positive and negative emotions, that they feel known, understood, and adored. And that they feel safe expressing their emotions. And unfortunately, this may not be the case in every family, but we need to, if we do have little ones in our lives or even teenagers or high school students in our lives, we need to make sure that they're feeling some types of connection to the adults in their lives and the positive role models that they have, because this will ultimately help them deal with stressful situations or the adversity that we're living in right now. It is also important to encourage our kids or children not to suppress negative emotions. And I myself find myself catching saying things like, don't cry, there's no reason to cry, that sort of things. And I have to pause and reflect and think that that's not a good thing to say, because every emotion is a valid emotion, and we need to encourage our child to express themselves effectively. We need to show that relationships matter by addressing conflict directly, working to solve problems rather than letting them fester. This is much more important now, especially when we have multiple family members under one roof, under quarantine, or practicing social distancing. So this is very important to reiterate positive ways to address conflict. And it's also important to help children develop connections with others outside the family unit, which can be difficult during this time. But I think with technology and it is still important to make sure that our children are connecting maybe with friends, if they're middle school or high school age, with their teacher, and with you as if you're a parent at home. Number 4 is character. Every family has its own idea of what constitutes good character. Whatever the specifics, children need a fundamental sense of right and wrong to ensure they are prepared to contribute to the world and become stable adults. It helps children become comfortable sticking to their own values and demonstrating a caring attitude towards others. And parents can help with this by helping their child identify their behaviors and how it might affect them and others in a good or bad way. So one of the things, I have a 3-year-old, and one of the things that I say to her when she lies, it's like, are you lying to mommy? That's not being kind. So, again, trying to foster what is right and what is wrong. It is also important to model what you do. So when you make decisions or take actions, express out loud how you think about those needs and what is your thought process. Again, children are learning through the adults in their lives, and they would model their behavior. In our first session, we talked about the importance of role models, so we need to keep that at the forefront of what we do. Number 5 is contributing. It's very powerful when children realize that the world is a better place because they're in it. So how can the child contribute to your household, contribute to the community at large, help them think about how to serve others and have some kind of positive outcome for something other than themselves? That is very important. This act will also help children feel more comfortable turning to others for assistance without feeling shame. And one of the things that we talked about in part 1 was the importance of being able to seek out help when you need it, or assistance when you need it. And so in helping students or children contribute to their environment, they're also able to take in contribution or ask for contribution from other people. It's essentially the theory here. Coping is the next one. Children who learn to cope with stress effectively are better prepared to overcome life's challenges. So again, helping children also differentiate a crisis versus something minor and setbacks. But with that, I would caution that what may be minor to us as adults is major to our children. So some of the losses, for example, that are happening at middle school and high school with the lack of ability to be socially connected or physically connected right now with your friends, the fact that graduation may not happen for our seniors, those are really big losses for our children and our students. And so it's important to help them cope with those stressors. So even though we might not see them as major, depending on what's going on in our own personal lives, these are major setbacks for that to them. And again, it's important for us as parents or as adults to model a step-by-step problem-solving approach, avoiding reacting emotionally when you're overwhelmed. And I know, for example, that you might see me calm now, but there are times where I've also lost it on my child, and which I've felt really bad about afterwards. And I think during those times, the most effective approach is to be able to apologize and admit that you're wrong and make amends with that child, so they also know that we're human and that we make mistakes, and that's okay, because no one obviously is perfect. Then the last one listed here is control. When children's decision affects their lives, they learn that they have control. And again, many of us may feel like we do not have control of what's happening right now, but it's important for each of us to feel some sense of control, even if it's the control of scheduling out our day, or control for a child of what their days might look like, or what their meals might look like, or what they're going to wear that day. So helping children have a sense of control in their lives is very important. It helps them and be able to bounce back after challenges. And if parents make all the decisions, children may believe things happen to them rather than because of their own choices. And that can obviously be problematic in terms of inhibiting resilience in children overall. So I know I've given you a lot of information, so I just wanted to stop there and ask my moderator, Louise, if there's any questions or comments in the chat box, or anything that anyone needed to direct to me right now.
Not at the moment, but if they want to type in, I'll read them off. So Tom has a question.
Go ahead.
Can you hear?
I unmuted you.
Okay, thank you. One of the things I believe as a retired health teacher is that now that we will be needing strategies to have our children become more adapted to the classroom setting again, I think it's going to be very important to do some things that basically was only in the high school curriculum for health. And quite honestly, elementary teachers never had the time, or until now, the necessity. But to deal with stress and to deal with decision making and goals, I think is going to be extremely important to help the schools get back to whatever normal may be in the future. That's just my take from your wonderful presentation of the 7 C's.
Yes, I think one of the things that you're referring to is not only stress management, but also regulation, right? Self-regulation and management of that, management of loss, and the intricacies of the complex trauma, and whatever the culmination of everything's going to be for each individual child. I think that there definitely needs to be a systemic approach at all levels, not only for the children, but also for the adults, as we see that during this time, not only are there a lot of stressors, but there's a lot of different types of losses. So loss of community and individual connections, definitely, but also loss of jobs, of maybe status, of life, in multiple lives sometimes in an individual's world. So definitely there needs to be some kind of transformation, I hope, in the educational system in terms of how we approach the social emotional developments of everyone within that system.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the national stress test is going to have to make some adjustments to the questions that we used to give our. I think there was like 60 questions I used to give every semester to the new students of a national stress test, and each stressor had a point value to it, and it was sometimes comical, and other times it was extremely sad when students would talk about the stressors in their life, and it was, it was really wonderful. Group thing. I always opened it up to the classroom for discussion, and it was just amazing what high school kids go through that some of us don't realize anymore. But that's going to change.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Comments, thoughts, questions? No. Okay. I'm going to move on. I want to talk about resilient families and a little bit of what that means. Sorry, let me go back. No, wait, did that? Okay. So obviously ideally, we want our families to be one of the most important sources of resilience, right? And hopefully it is the place where we learn what it is to feel safe, what it is to feel loved, and what it is to feel accepted. I'm not going to go over each of these because I do want us to have a little bit of a conversation about community resilience as well. And I'm just watching the time, but I wanted to share some of these. So in terms of making meaning of adversity, what does that mean? So it's really thinking about, we're in a crisis right now, but what is it that it's teaching us, right? What is the meaning behind where we're living? I think that collectively, some of us may say, well, it was a pause in what was before the quote unquote rat race of consumerism, of work, of spending less time with our families and that sort of thing. In terms of education, it's like we were just saying, it may be the chance and the opportunity that we needed to be advocates for all our children and focus on a transformative equity lens that is beyond what was instituted before this, right? So making meaning of adversity is basically just thinking about what are the lessons that we're learning right now. Obviously, when we talk about maintaining a positive outlook, as I mentioned in the first part of the series, it's not empty positivity. It's more so of a realistic positive outlook in terms of, this will pass. And with that, what can I control right now? How can I protect myself and my family until it passes? So it's thinking that there is sort of a light at the end of the tunnel, and seeing also, like the saying goes, the glass half full versus half empty. So what are the things that we need to be thankful for right now, big or small, for ourselves and our families? We also talked about resilient families also have some kind of spirituality or religious practices, right? We know that a lot of people, at least in my own Catholic community, have been watching masses or on Facebook, or listening to things in Christian networks on the radio as they're driving, that sort of thing. So while others are practicing more mindful moments, or even reading poetry, walking in nature. Those are all things that our families who are most resilient do during such stressful times as a crisis. Practicing flexibility is also important. I think more so important now than ever, because of the time that we're in, obviously. I think for me specifically, although I have a general structure of the day, there are times where that structure is impacted by one thing or another. And so the practicing flexibility, going with the ebb and flow of the day or the weeks is more beneficial in general and enhances individual and familial resilience. We talked about the importance of being connected with our families, our friends, having some kind of support system. The ability to draw on social and economic resources is definitely highly, highly beneficial, especially for those most vulnerable families. They may need to know where to go to get food, how to advocate for themselves against rent, or being charged for rent during this time, or knowing where to go for legal counsel. So drawing on their socioeconomic resources and helping families do that is very, very important during this time, specifically for our most vulnerable families. Achieving clarity is related to cognitive clarity about what's going on. There's a lot of misinformation. I know that culturally, specifically in my own Latino community, there's a lot of misinformation about COVID-19 and the crisis, who to call, whether to go to the hospital or not, whether there's a cure or not. There's a lot of misinformation out there. And so it is important for many of us, specifically who are in the helping professions, to make sure that our families have the right information at the right time that they need it. Again, expressing emotions openly. Families, whether good or negative, I should say positive or negative emotions, it is important for our families to have some kind of venue to vent, or to someone to talk to about their difficulties, and help someone who can also with that help them problem solve collectively or collaboratively through their own issues, to empower them to make changes, to empower them to tap into the resources that are available in their community. So with that, I'm going to pose the question for you to think about: how can I help a family in crisis? For you to reflect upon. If you'd like to input something in the chat box, you can, or if you want to be unmuted, please let me know. I know that this is really can be a challenging time for us. To helpers who really want to do more may not know how much to expose ourselves during this time, and so it may be quite challenging to navigate the idea of, yes, I want to help other people, but this is only so much, this is what I can do, right? So I would like for each of us to think about how much is within your sphere of influence to do something, and that it's okay if you don't fully put yourself out there, because everybody has their own challenges and their own comfort level, right? So I'm gonna pause there and see if there's anything, Louise, in the chat box that we need to discuss.
There's a comment. Being available and reminding families that they aren't alone during times of need. Additionally, connecting families to resources and following up.
Yes. Sometimes it's just that, right? Just letting a family know, I'm here for you, or what do you need? Even if it's just a listening ear, just so that they know that there's someone that they can reach out to is important.
There's also someone who said that they think having names and numbers of agencies that assist during these times of conflict.
Yes. I know there's tons and tons of resources out there. I know that I've been collecting resources along with other leaders through PNW BOCES and putting resources out there. Each community has their own resources on their school websites and things like that. But it's also important to think about not only the connection of the families to those resources, but also like the advancement of equity within that, because sometimes we may think that they have access when they don't have full access. And so definitely, yes, making sure that they know where to go and how to access their resources effectively.
We also have reducing academic demands for teens who've had to go to work to support the family, to create equity as they do not have the same free time as other students.
Yes, we know that, like I mentioned before, there are families who may be economically that much more strained, and so they have to find other means to make money. So sometimes high school students have taken an additional job. Sometimes they're helping little ones at home in the absence of a parent. So definitely that goes along with knowing who our clients are, right? Knowing who we're servicing, and being able to ask that question of, what do you need? What's going on in your life? How can we help? So those important connections and realizations, and being flexible on the other end as we venture into this new realm of virtual education, that we have highlighted, for lack of a better word, the inequities that truly exist among our students and families of color specifically, or our children or families who have students with disabilities. So we knew about the inequities in education, and now they seem to be exacerbated by the crisis that we're in. So it's important to ask those questions and make sure that we're providing some type of level of support. Okay, we're going to move into resilient communities, and what does that mean? Some of this work also overlaps. So how can I contribute to community resilience? And again, there are the dissemination of information and communication is important. The community's competence level in terms of feeling that they're able to nurture and support each other. I know I specifically live in Peekskill, and I know that, for example, the governor had talked about the leniency on rent for the next 3 months, but then what is going to happen when people have to pay 3 months of rent at once and they've been laid off, or they're not working, or they're whatever the case may be. So one of the things that just came out in Peekskill was the resolution that banks, businesses, renters are going to come up with an alternative plan or a payment plan beyond, above and beyond what the governor is stating, in terms of supporting people who may be having difficulty financially, and that they're collectively trying to come up with an alternative that there's going to be, for example, maybe some kind of payment plan after all this is over, as opposed to expecting all 3 months of rent to be paid at once. So we have communities that have problem solved within themselves and to developed means of quote unquote protection for each other that increases the competencies within the community as a whole. And those are quite important to highlight as well, specifically when there's maybe times where we don't see that, or obviously because the news is written with the horrors that are evident with this pandemic. Sometimes it's very easy to overlook the positives that are going on in our community. So it is important to look for those. So one of the question here is, how am I contributing to community resilience? Are you contributing by disseminating positive information? Are you contributing by giving out technology, by doing food drives, or whatever, or by simply just donating through your phone to a specific cause during this time? So I think every little bit that we can do individually for the community at large is beneficial. Again, given your own kind of willingness and ability to do so, of course. I'm going to go through some of these slides. I know these were also part of a different presentation, but these are some, as we're winding down in terms of the time soon, I just do want to open it up to some general questions or comments. These are some of the thoughts, some of the questions that we should be thinking about specifically in terms of community resilience during this time. As we, as educators, as clinicians, as people within our community, it is important to think about, have we asked our communities what they need, as opposed to implying that we know what our communities need. I know there are some communities who language and culture may be factors that may impede their resilience, and because of lack of resources. And so we need to make sure that we collaborate to mitigate the effects of language and culture in assessing community resources and social support networks. So some of the things that we've been doing is that some people have been getting together in different ways from different agencies to collaborate and do, let's say, make sure that we disseminate information or infographics in Spanish or other languages, so that we know that communities who are non-English speaking communities have access to the information that they need. We want to make sure that we also do not overlook the strengths of individuals and communities, and that we harness those strengths to reach more favorable outcomes. And we need to look at sub-communities when we're talking about not only quote unquote the general Latino communities, but maybe there is a specific, let's say, Ecuadorian community in Peekskill that have some kind of strength within their own network that can increase the chances of favorable outcomes during this time. Again, how can we continue to be advocates, to continue to inform school officials about the needs of children, parents, and communities? What is it that we know that they need, and how can we advocate for that? And what kind of supports do families or communities need to do remote learning? So we might be I was talking to someone yesterday, I believe, and we're talking about how can we make sure that our families have access to the technology. They may have access to a cell phone, but they may not know exactly how to go into a Zoom meeting. and to walk them through that. So again, identifying what is it that our families and communities need in order to navigate this time so that they can feel more successful. And lastly, these are just some general community resilient questions to think about for today. And I know we're thinking in the here and now, but I think we need to also anticipate the needs and potential resolutions for the future, as we were talking about earlier, in terms that we hope that this is a time for transformation within our educational systems so that SEL, our social emotional learning, and supports emotional regulation and everything, including compassion, and everything that makes us more human and connected to each other is at the forefront of the educational system moving forward. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording here and open it up to questions and comments.